CTV's chief political correspondent, Vassy Kapelos, has been following the talks. Vassy, before we get into the meat of what was said at that discussion earlier, any little whispers in your ear about what may have happened behind closed doors?
Well, I'm told by anyone I can get a hold of that the tone that you saw in those public-facing comments for about 45 minutes this afternoon did carry over, but still no indications of substantively what was agreed to. We are hearing that we might be hearing from, I should say, the minister in charge of all this, Dominic LeBlanc, as soon as an hour from now, but that timing is very fluid. So certainly we'll keep you and our viewers apprised of that. But really, that is the main question right now. Sure, the tone and tenor were good, were positive, and that is a relief to some extent. But now what does that actually mean? And some of the comments that you just played, I think, offer us a hint of what it could mean.
Let's talk about that shift in tone just for a second, because Carney, as you very well recall, campaigned on a promise of elbows up. But now we're hearing both of these leaders heap praise on each other, congratulate each other, and there was a lot of talk of love in that joint meeting a few moments ago. How has this become a charm offensive and a shift in strategy for Carney?
Well, I think it hasn't been abrupt. I think we saw some of that very early on into the Carney mandate when he initially met with President Trump at the White House that first time. And certainly through the course of the G7, where he was heaping on praise onto the U.S. president for his quote-unquote leadership on the world stage. That marks another pivot. And I'm using the word pivot or change, and that's probably like a generous way of describing it. I think there are two ways to look at this. If you're the Liberals, you're saying, okay, look, this was necessary. This is obviously what's required to be able to land at a better outcome for Canada. If you're the Conservatives and people who support them, you're saying, wait a second. This is not the bag of goods that you sold us during the campaign. You positioned yourself as someone who could be best suited to stand up to Donald Trump, not to offer effusive praise on multiple occasions and ultimately come home with tariffs that were very punishing tariffs that remain on sectors. And we saw some evidence during question period today of that criticism from the Conservatives and the rebuttal from the Liberals. So there's a definite demarcation in tone over the last number of months where we've gone from elbows up to like, where are the elbows? Let's just talk about how great Trump is. The question is whether or not that becomes a very pronounced political vulnerability for the Prime Minister, or if it lands us a better deal with the United States, as seems to be the thesis emerging from the federal government.
Let's talk about a possible deal here, because Trump said at the end of those joint comments, I think you're going to be very happy. And I'm wondering if that was a possible hat tip to what we expected to be a reprieve on steel and aluminum tariffs. Do you think he's hinting at something there?
Well, Carolyn, if only I knew what Donald Trump was hinting at, I certainly would be rolling around in bags of money right now. But unfortunately, I have no way to discern exactly what he means. There's a couple of things that he did say, though. I mean, you're right to point to tariffs, right? Because that's the immediate relief that Canada is looking for. That's where the punishment on our economy exists right now, on those sectors that have just immense tariffs placed on them. But the more interesting thing that I thought jumped out at me was in that exchange that you played off the top of our segment, which involved the Prime Minister talking about increasing investment in the United States if the agreement that they're working on should arise, and then the President referencing agreement that can be made outside of what we disagree on, which he mentioned on multiple occasions were the tariffs. So there's a couple of things I'm thinking about in that vein: critical minerals, Keystone XL, things that are outside just our trading relationship, defense spending. Like, is there a different agreement that could be worked on? Something in those comments tipped, my attention toward what is happening in the relationship outside of the trade conflict that we are so incredibly laser focused on, and for good reason. That might be what they announced today, and ultimately what will that involve on the Canadian side? Because if we're becoming more involved with the United States on other issues, that presents a whole different political complexity, insofar as the message from the government so far has been, let's wean ourselves off the U.S. If the pitch is, let's go more in on investment and other things with the United States, with Trump as president, that's going to be a difficult square to circle, or circle to square, and I'm interested to see the way in which that happens, should that be the case.
Well, I think there will have to be a give and take here. Would you not agree with that, Vassy? It's not that Canada's going to walk into the Oval Office and say, can you please lift those tariffs for us? And they're going to say, sure, no problem. There's going to be some sort of a concession. Is that what you're anticipating?
Yeah, I mean, look, the question is how big of a concession and how many concessions. The fascinating part of this whole Trump world and the last 6-8 months is that everything he said countries would do because of his tariff regime, they largely have. Countries that have landed an agreement with the United States have made massive concessions wherein they agree to a baseline level of tariffs anywhere from 10 to 19%. A year ago, if we had been having this discussion, we would never have envisioned that would be the possibility. So clearly, there are concessions that are necessary to arrive at a deal that Trump will agree to. The question for Canadians will be, what is the level of those concessions, and are they prepared to support them?
All right, that's CTV's chief political correspondent, Vassy Kapelos. Vassy, thanks for your time as always.